Hi friends, we are in the first week of the last month of the craziest year for as long as I can remember. It's been a rough one. For a lot of us, it's been rough, and for some, it's been harder than for others. But I wanted to check in here and share some stuff with you about my own journey this year. I was reminded yesterday when I connected with some friends from my early years in ministry and my early years in my own journey of pursuing health and wholeness, how important it is to engage in conversations about what's really going on inside, what we're really learning, what knowledge we're gaining and how we're growing. And when we express those things out loud, what it does is it creates an opportunity for conversation where there is no shame, there's no judgment. We are destroying the stigma that is surrounding mental health. Every time we say out loud, this is my reality, and I'm just going to be real with you. Every time I share something publicly online, I have that push and that desire and that motivation to truly and hopefully help somebody else feel less power in that stigma, that those chains are broken more and more every time we're vulnerable, every time we're honest, every time that we say, hey, this is me, let's be real with each other. So jumping on here to be real with you guys, August, September, and October were very, very difficult months for me. I'm in a master's program right now. I'm getting my master's in counseling. I am doing an internship where I have been trained in the specific program of the grief recovery method. And sometimes people finish that program and will continue on to meet with me as an individual or a couple. And I am providing that kind of counseling under a supervisor. And these months kind of came and I realized that something was off inside of me. Something was very, very off, and I needed to kind of slowly evaluate and cut back on clients and try to kind of surround myself with more support than I had. I started to try to understand what was off inside of me, and I couldn't really figure it out. So I was getting a lot of input from others, and the off, the best way I know how to describe it, is the overwhelmedness that I felt just in general was causing me to want to quit everything. I wanted to quit my job. I wanted to quit school. I wanted to go and stay in my dad's cabin for 6 months and try to figure life out. And I knew that there was something in me that was so overwhelmed that I needed to just slow down enough to be able to process that. In one of my courses, we were going over the diagnostic manual, and we came across the week about ADHD. And I thought I could really skim through this week because my husband has ADHD and my son has ADHD and my mom had ADHD. And I'm just so familiar with this diagnosis that I can pay less attention this week, right? So I'm reading through the diagnostic manual and it says, you need like 6 of these symptoms for 6 months or more. And I was like, wait a second, I have like 8 or 9 of these. Wait a second. And I went back and I read the diagnostics about ADHD again. That definitely spurred some curiosity in me about how many of the symptoms I was relating to. And I suddenly had flashbacks about when I was very young. I was in junior high or high school, and I asked if my mom could please take me to get diagnosed for ADHD because of how overwhelming life felt to me, about how I felt so off in certain settings, especially social settings, and something in me just felt off. And when I'd heard of ADHD symptoms, I could relate to some of them. And my mom's response to me at that younger age was, there's not much they can do to help you treat ADHD, so if you do have it, you just need to learn how to manage it anyways. So that was my first lesson. I've since then learned that my mom was not only diagnosed, but she also had a really bad experience with medication. I've actually learned that very recently. I did not realize that, but it makes a lot of sense to me why, as a mother, she wanted to protect me from having a terrible experience with medication. They've learned a lot about ADHD since then, in the last 20 years. They've been learning about ADHD for a few hundred years. It hasn't always been called ADHD, but it has a string of research connected to symptomology that's related to ADHD. Fast forward to when my husband and I were first married, and I told him I'd really like to talk to a therapist about me getting evaluated for ADHD. Life feels more complicated than it should. I feel quite overwhelmed, anxious, stressed about things I shouldn't get so worked up about. A lot of big emotions that I don't always know how to manage, and I just like to talk to somebody about that. We went in, she did the questions. She said, I don't do an official assessment, but I'm going to ask you questions, and you just tell me how many of these do you relate to. Probably the DSM-5, which is the diagnostic manual, or whatever version it was at that time. And as she asked me the questions, I thought I can relate to several of these. But every question she's asking me is like my husband, like on the nose. There was like one that wasn't him. And he, of course, was sitting next to me, and my response at the end was, I can relate to several of those, but like it just sounds like so much like Ryan. And Ryan was like, yeah, like I could relate to every single one of those. And then her response was, I think I know why you're so overwhelmed, Jen. You don't have ADHD. You're married to somebody who has ADHD, and that can be overwhelming. Okay, bad information number 2. So Ryan, to me, became the standard of what ADHD looks like. Fast forward to me being in this master's program. I've learned so much in the last 3 months about how ADHD shows up different in females, especially as girls and young boys. I've learned about how boys often take that energy and the emotions and they act out. It comes out. So there's an outward expression, whereas girls can tend to hold that in or focus it inward or find ways to control it. And it can be really hard on their body physically. It can be taxing to kind of have a level of maturity and know what's expected for how you're supposed to behave, and to be able to get by, but to feel like everything is very hard, like it's always harder than it should be, and to not really understand why. So I went to get assessed. Was actually assessed by 2 different people, and both confirmed that I have ADHD. It's strange and weird for me to say at 44 that I've recently been diagnosed with ADHD. A week and a half after I was diagnosed and it was confirmed that I have ADHD, I went to a psychiatrist to ask for help because I needed something. I knew that there were many tools that I could use to help manage ADHD. I obviously have used many of those tools my whole life, but something was causing my coping mechanisms to break down. The psychiatrist prescribed me the lowest possible dosage of Adderall, and I can't tell you how hard it was for me to fill that prescription and pick it up. There was so much shame, there was so much pain in the acknowledgement that I needed a medication to help me with a neurological issue. ADHD is something that affects the brain and how the brain is communicating and processing and how it affects us. It also affects emotions. We don't hear a lot about that in the diagnostic symptomology when it's evaluated, when we do our assessments, but there's so much research about how ADHD affects emotions and how we regulate our emotions. And I wanted that help. And I knew that if I just had a little bit of help, it could actually get me to the point where I could utilize all those other tools. But I had so much advice about the tools I should be using and how I really didn't need the medication. And guys, I couldn't keep it up with the tools. The healthy eating, the healthy sleeping, the bullet journaling, all the ways that we can just manage the difficulties that are going on inside of our mind and our body and our emotions with a struggle of ADHD. I needed help to be able to implement all the other tools. So it's been about 2 weeks now, and I've been on medication. And looking back at the experience over the last few months, one of the things that has come to me that's pretty significant and that I want to share with you is that receiving a diagnosis, although it seems like it could potentially be scary, can be extremely insightful. Looking back at my entire life through this lens is like taking a pair of glasses and putting on a new prescription, and everything becomes very clear. Everything suddenly makes sense. I didn't have the right prescription, and I wasn't looking back at my life or my present experiences correctly. And so everything felt blurry and confusing and very skewed, and it was extremely overwhelming. Allowing myself to get medical help for the neurological diagnosis that I received was hard. It was painful, emotionally painful, until somebody who coaches adults with ADHD said to me, "Would you tell your dad who has adult onset diabetes that he shouldn't be taking his medication to help him stay in a healthy zone?" I said, "I would never tell him that." She's like, "What's the problem?" But the problem is that there's so much stigma. You guys, there's so much stigma around diagnoses, around mental health, around going to a psychiatrist and getting an evaluation. Was also diagnosed with struggles with anxiety, generalized anxiety. And I think that there's too much shame attached to these things. There's too much judgment that maybe we are afraid of or that we've actually experienced. And I want to share this with you because I'm getting my master's in counseling and I'm meeting with people right now. I've cut back on my clients to the point where I felt like I could manage a healthy load, but I have people I'm meeting with right now and I feel comfortable with the load that I have right now, and I have people who are coaching me and helping me to be healthy. And it just hit me that if I can't say these things out loud, then how am I helping other people break the stigma and break the shame and break the fear of saying, I need some help. Something in me is off. I need something to look different and I don't know what it is, but I need to talk to people and figure out what's going on. So I wanted to share this with you guys today. And you'll probably see a lot of posts on my Instagram page about ADHD because I'm learning a lot and I'm wanting to share it. But I'm going to be sharing about a lot of mental health issues because I think this conversation is important, and I think that breaking away the stigma of shame and the fear of judgment and the fear of taking medication, if that's something that would be helpful, is a conversation that I want to enter into to help people feel free. So if you want to private message me and ask me any questions or share anything about your own journey, I'm here for you. Thanks for taking time to watch this video. I love you guys. Hey, this is the home stretch for 2020. We've got this. We're in it together. Let's finish this well. Love ya. Bye.